Welcome to the Delmarva Almanac. Each week we connect you to the best of Delmarva. I'm your host, Dana Kester McCabe. Hannibal Lee is a painter living in Nanticoke with a studio in Salisbury. He was born and raised on his grandmother's farm near the DuPont family steeplechases around Fair Hill, Maryland. This led him to an early love of animals. His family encouraged him to follow his creative pursuits as a youngster. Hannibal's father worked for the Curtis Paper Company, which specialized in custom high-grade papers used for such prestigious projects as the White House's Christmas cards. One of his father's co-workers at the paper plant gave him a tip that led to Hannibal's having an auspicious teacher. Here is Hannibal Lee.
One of the fellows there, he was with the shopkeepers that, repair the machinery or kept it running. And he said to me, he says, have you heard of Andrew Wyeth? And I said, yeah, I guess. And he says, oh, come on. He says, Andrew Wyeth in Chatsford. And I said, all right. And he says, I understand his sister, Carolyn Wyeth, is taking students for painting lessons. So I packed up the car with my portfolio, unannounced and uninvited, and went up and knocked on Carolyn Wyeth's door. Well, it was a very rainy morning, and she had 10 dogs. Hybrid dogs, poodles, and dogs she had rescued from the pound. So she comes out and jumps in my new car with all these muddy dogs following behind me. And she's telling them to get in the GD car. We're going up to my father's studio. So we went up to NCY's studio, which is a beautiful building on the hillside, and I believe it's open to the public now. So she looked at my portfolio and she said, yes, I'll take you as a student. She said, but you have some kind of special abilities. So I became a private student with her, and we became friends. So, and when we were in Port Clyde, Maine, she says, let's go over and visit Andy. She said, I want him to see your work. Well, he went through my oils and watercolors, and he said, yeah, I said, I really like these oils. He says, they have a lot of Edward Hopper influence. And I said, God, I hate his work. I said, I don't like Edward Hopper's work. And he says, wait a minute. He says, he's one of the best American contemporary artists that we have. Well, of course, I had opened my mouth and inserted my foot. So I learned a lesson from that, not to be so outspoken. Well, maybe I didn't learn the lesson.
After working in oils and watercolors for some time, a friend offered him a stash of textile remnants in case he wanted to find a creative use for them.
He was working for the Schumacher Company, and they do fine upper grade fabrics. So he had brought some discarded fabrics home to his wife, and they asked me if I wanted some. So on a whim, I made a picture, a side view of a 1920 Rolls Royce with the driver up front, the chauffeur with his handlebar mustache and a duster, and out of the back window of the Rolls I had this lion waving. What was just whimsical and put together, very primitive with all these fabrics. So this fellow had a gallery on the Kennett Pike, and he said, why don't we try 20 of these, make up some whimsical ones, because he was selling my oils and watercolors. So I made up 20 cats in canopy beds and frogs and praying mantises and all these kind of things, and peacocks. So on the second night of the show, we had sold 16 out of 20. Well, anyway, that put me on my way of making pictures with textiles. And then I had people who wanted commission pictures made. So I did that. I went on and made pictures for different people of commission pieces, for Mrs. Carpenter in Wilmington, for Mrs. Lickle, and as I made them, I learned how to make them better.
Hannibal became intrigued with the history of tapestries as an art form, and he began to reproduce famous tapestries using his newfound medium. He makes drawing maps of his designs and then cuts out each area of color in a corresponding fabric. The result is a combination of collage and bas-relief. These elaborate works of art look representational from a distance, but up close they are a celebration of hue, texture, and textile patterns. Their three-dimensionality adds another layer of interest for the viewer.
It's like when I built a great blue heron, it's like the actual feathers. With a lot of commission pieces, these grasses and artifacts, the barks, come from the patron's property, so it makes it a very personalized thing. For a while, I did not put them under glass, but people wanted to touch them. They were so, intrigued by them. So I started putting them under glass, and now today they go under museum glass where you don't get any reflections of the pictures. And then I had a show in Harrisburg with Mary Kay Interiors, and there in Harrisburg, she placed 8 of my pictures with the Hershey Library, and I'm sure they're still on exhibition today. There's one of an actual size line that the pictures may be 3 foot tall and 8 foot wide kind of thing.
Hannibal began to call his reproductions translations because they translated oils into fabric. But he did not just look to the ancient fiber arts. He began to study in depth the work of Vincent van Gogh, which did not necessarily meet with the approval of his mentor.
When Carolyn and I would be in the studio, we would have royal 4-letter word battles that she thought he was worthless and I thought he was great. We would laugh about these kind of things. She was a fabulous, wonderful character. So anyway, my intrigue with Van Gogh continued. And I have maybe 65 to 70 books on Van Gogh. I've gone to all the art exhibitions. And I've read all 650 of his letters. Well, what happened, along the way, being so enamored or so involved with Van Gogh's pictures and knowing, what he did to produce his pictures. And he talks about, collecting capes, bonnets, jackets. He talks about, the woodblock print being like crepe paper or crepe paper or whatever. All these things. And so along the way, I shifted off and I thought, I'm going to start doing his pictures in fabric. Because the bottom line is, how I'm saying now is, he translated fabrics into oil paint. And my tribute to him and his genius was to transplant his paintings back into fabrics.
A major project that Hannibal recently completed was 3 paintings that Vincent van Gogh wrote about in his letters to his brother Theo, who was an art dealer. The centerpiece was a portrait of a woman. Vincent had wanted this piece to hang with one of his sunflower paintings on either side. The original portrait still exists. Though many of his sunflower paintings do survive, those he had chosen for this arrangement were destroyed during World War II. After Vincent's death, Theo had sold the works separately. Hannibal talks about translating Vincent's original vision for the 3 paintings.
With this, I want Vincent's triptych resurrected. Mr. Walter Annenberg, who left his collection to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, owned Madame Rouleau. There are 5 versions of this, and I believe he bought the first version. The other 4 versions, her hands are reversed in the pictures. And he always wanted this triptych done. He did a letter to his brother with this design of how he wanted these 3 pictures laid out. And he talks about putting orange lath strips around the sunflowers. Simplified. So that's why it has an orange border around it. And he talked about her having ordinary red painted lath strips. And it took 6 years to make this picture. It was the 125th anniversary of Vincent van Gogh's death last year. And I just want to give him credit for what he's done for the world and what I want to do for him.
Hannibal Lee says that with so many of Van Gogh's works held in private collections, he hopes his translations will end up in places where everyone can enjoy them. Hannibal recently had a show at the Ocean City Center for the Arts. Once completed, he hopes to bring the rest of his Van Gogh series back there. To see samples of his work and get a link to his website, go to our website, delmarvaalmanac.com/arts. Well, that's all for this edition of the Delmarva Almanac. Be sure to follow us on Facebook or Twitter, and next week join us to learn more about our local culture and get connected to our natural wonders. We'd like to thank our community partners, the Friends of Delmarva Public Radio, and our underwriters for their help in bringing this program to you, our audience. If you'd like to become an underwriter for this program, visit delmarvaalmanac.com/support. Our theme music was provided by Brightside Studio. This show has been a Moonshell production. Thanks for listening. Until we meet again, may the rhythms and tides of Delmarva bring you good fortune.